The courtroom hums with low murmurs until the door slams open. Judge Greg Mathis storms in, robes sweeping behind him like a wave of authority, crashing into silence. His eyes sharp, scanning the room with an edge of suspicion that settles like smoke. A young black man stands quietly at the clerk's table. Head slightly bowed, organizing files. The judge's gaze latches onto him, narrowing, and then with a voice laced in arrogance and public disdain, he growls, "You there, who let the intern mess with court documents." The entire room stiffens. "Your Honor," the man replies gently without raising his eyes. "I was asked to prepare these files for today's docket." His voice is soft, respectful, but unshakably steady. Mathis scoffs, turning to the courtroom like a performer playing to an eager crowd. "I don't know which law school you stumbled out of," he mocks, "but in my courtroom, credentials matter. You don't get respect just for standing there looking serious." A few snickers ripple through the room. The young man finally looks up, and for a moment his gaze flickers with something deeper, something ancient and powerful. But he says nothing. He resumes his quiet task as Mathis continues his loud commentary. "I built my career rising from Detroit streets. I've seen hustle, but this is fake hustle." The young man's hands still for a moment, the weight of the moment cracking invisibly across his chest. He grew up in Atlanta, raised by a single mother who worked night shifts at a hospital and read him Langston Hughes by flashlight. At 29, Marcus J. Fields, tall, lean, with chestnut skin and observant dark eyes, has endured every form of quiet dismissal overlooked in law school discussions. Misidentified as a delivery man when attending interviews, and now in front of a crowded courtroom labeled an intern by a judge who never bothered to ask his name. He straightens his back and steps back from the desk. The humiliation burns but doesn't break him. He's used to being mistaken for less than he is. Across the room, a sharp-suited court officer leans toward Mathis and whispers something. The judge freezes. "Wait," he says louder than necessary. "You're not an intern." Marcus says nothing. The courtroom doors open again, and the room collectively gasps. In strides, Elon Musk, flanked by two discreet but firm security officers. The CEO's presence is electrifying, unexpected, and utterly surreal in this formal setting of justice and tradition. His sharp eyes zero in on Marcus, and a warm smile spreads across his face. "There you are," Musk says, walking straight to the young man, ignoring everyone else. "I've been looking for you all morning." Mathis blinks, stunned. "Wait, what is going on?" he demands. Elon's voice carries calm authority. "I asked Marcus to evaluate the legal infrastructure for my new AI ethics division. I told him to sit in and observe today's court dynamics. I wasn't expecting a public shaming." A cold silence crashes over the room. Mathis sputters. "AI ethics. He works for you." Elon's gaze sharpens. "Marcus Fields is the lead counsel for Neural Equity, one of the most advanced legal think tanks we've assembled. And you," he points calmly toward Mathis, just berated him for his skin, his quiet presence, and your own prejudice. The judge's lips part, but no words form. The crowd shifts uneasily, murmurs turning into roars of realization. Marcus breathes deeply, but doesn't smirk, doesn't gloat. He turns to the judge, meeting his eyes now, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. "For years," he says softly, his voice finally allowed to carry people like me, "have had to earn our place 10 times over just to be dismissed at the door. I'm not here to shame you back. Your Honor, I'm here to change what happens next." Elon steps beside him. which is why we've launched a national legal outreach program led by Marcus to bring equity technology and reform to courtrooms that still judge books by their covers. The judge sits back, deflated, his once proud stance now crumbling under the weight of the truth. Someone in the gallery stands and starts clapping. Then another. Within moments, the courtroom is echoing with applause. Not for Musk, not for the program, but for Marcus, for the quiet man who endured insult without retaliation, who stood with dignity even when made to kneel. As the noise swells, Judge Mathis, face pale, leans forward and mutters into the mic, "I was wrong." And Marcus, eyes gleaming with a quiet fire, only nods. Later, as the courthouse clears out, a young law student approaches Marcus outside her eyes, wide with admiration. "They said you didn't belong," she whispers. "But today you changed everything." Marcus smiles gently. Sometimes, he says, you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to be ready when the world finally listens. The sun glints off the courthouse steps as he walks away. The echoes of justice trailing behind him like the final notes of a long overdue song, reminding everyone who watched that the measure of a person is not in how loudly they speak, but in how they rise when the world tries to silence them. As Marcus steps out into the soft light of the afternoon, the echo of clapping still faint in the air, he exhales the weight of 1,000 moments like this. Moments where restraint was mistaken for weakness, where dignity had to wear armor, where a black man had to carry not just his role, but the burden of correcting others' assumptions. The courthouse behind him stands tall, but the real height is in the choice he made, not to fight fire with fire, not to humiliate the judge in return, but to stand in his truth, unshaken, unapologetic, and visible at last. Reporters begin to gather near the steps, cameras flicking on mics raised. "Mr. Fields, were you humiliated? Do you accept Judge Mathis's apology? How long have you worked with Elon Musk?" Questions fly like arrows, but Marcus remains still, eyes scanning the crowd until he spots a boy, maybe 10, dark-skinned, wearing a wrinkled shirt too big for him, standing silently at the back with a woman who looks like his mother. Their eyes meet, and in that glance, Marcus sees recognition, hope, and something else. Possibility. He lifts his hand and waves gently at the boy, whose eyes light up as if he just witnessed a living legend. Then Marcus turns to the microphones. "I wasn't embarrassed today," he begins, voice calm but deep with resonance, "because I know who I am." The shame belongs to those who speak before they see who judge, before they know who assume worth can be measured by volume, not value. A silence falls over the press as he continues. "But I also know we've all been taught by systems that are centuries old, systems that taught us who gets to speak, who gets to lead, and who's supposed to remain invisible." He looks toward the building. What happened in that courtroom happens in boardrooms, in classrooms, in offices, on streets. And it's time we see it, name it, and fix it. Not with outrage alone, but with change that lasts behind him. Elon Musk watches without speaking, his arms folded not in authority, but in solidarity. Reporters don't know what to ask next. No soundbite could match what just happened. Marcus steps down from the stairs and walks through the crowd, not around them, not above them, but through them. People parting like a sea around a man who just proved the future doesn't need permission from the past. That night, the video goes viral, not because of Musk's presence, but because of Marcus's poise. It spreads across social media like fire dignity under pressure, the calm that shamed a judge. This is how you change the system. In schools, students watch him speak in barbershops. Old men nod with pride at dinner tables. Mothers hold their sons a little tighter, whispering, "Look at him. Look how he stood." Meanwhile, back in his modest apartment, Marcus finally sits at his desk, loosening his tie. A framed photo of his mother smiling at him from the shelf above. He lifts a pen and begins writing his next policy brief for neural equity, but pauses, staring out the window into the glowing skyline, thinking of every kid like that boy outside the courthouse. He picks up his phone and texts Elon. "We need to take this further. Law school pipeline starting with underfunded schools. We don't need permission. Just support." Seconds later, a reply blinks in green light. Full funding. "Let's go." Marcus smiles. Not for himself, but for the millions of doors that just opened behind him. The world may have tried to box him in, mislabel him, ignore him, but now he was no longer just seen. He was heard. And the ripple of that day would go farther than any courtroom into policy, into education, into culture. Because sometimes the revolution doesn't shout. It speaks clearly, stands quietly, and walks straight through walls built to keep it out. A month later, the doors of Harvard Law's auditorium creak open as a sea of students floods in, buzzing not with gossip, but with something rarer, reverence. On stage, under soft amber lights, stands Marcus J. Fields, no longer just a name whispered across viral clips, but now a movement in motion. He wears a simple gray suit. No flash. No theatrics, just clarity in his posture and fire in his words. Behind him on the screen reads, "Power isn't given, it's remembered." He steps to the podium and the room silences instantly. "I was taught," he begins slowly, "that the law is a tool, a blade in the right hands, a chain in the wrong ones." The students lean in. "But what they didn't teach me," he continues, "was how often the law forgets who it was supposed to protect. How often it becomes a mirror of the fears and flaws of the ones interpreting it." He scans the crowd, locking eyes with young faces, holding notebooks, iPads, dreams. "I was almost erased in that courtroom last month," he says plainly. Not physically, not legally, but publicly erased by assumption, labeled an intern, questioned for my skin before my skill, stripped of identity by a single glance from a man who's judged millions. Murmurs, roll, heads, nod, and I didn't fight back with fire. Not because I couldn't, but because the system expects us to burn loud so it can say we're angry. I stayed calm, not for him, for every future Marcus that walks into a room where no one expects him to matter. The applause rises like a wave, but Marcus holds up his hand. "Wait," he says softly. "This isn't a victory speech, silence again. Because one viral video doesn't fix centuries. One moment of justice doesn't rewrite institutions built on exclusion." He steps from the podium, walking slowly toward the edge of the stage. "That's why I started the Fields Initiative. We are launching mentorship programs in 20 cities, legal literacy for youth, scholarships for future Black and brown attorneys, court watch systems to hold bias accountable. We're not waiting for the system to shift. We're becoming the lever." A young woman in the front row, tears in her eyes, whispers. Finally, Marcus smiles gently. "This is just the beginning," he says. "But hear me now. When they try to reduce you by your skin, your silence, your story stand taller, not to tower over them, but to remind them what it looks like when dignity refuses to disappear." The room erupts. Professors rise. Students chant his name, but Marcus doesn't soak in the spotlight. He steps down quietly, shaking hands, hugging young scholars who say things like, "You saved me. You gave me direction. You gave me permission." Later that night, as he sits alone in a quiet office overlooking the Charles River, a message comes through on his laptop from Judge Mathis. The subject line: "Forgive me." Marcus opens it. It's not long. A single paragraph. A rare apology, real unpolished. "You exposed something I didn't want to see in myself," it reads. "Thank you for your grace. I'll do better." Marcus exhales slowly. He doesn't reply. Not yet. He simply saves the message in a folder titled Change. He stares out into the darkness, city lights flickering like memories on the water, and thinks of his mother, of her hands cracked from night shifts, of the way she called him professor, even when they barely had rent. And now he's building more than just a name. He's building a path. Not for recognition, but for transformation. Tomorrow he flies to D.C. to testify before a Senate subcommittee on judicial equity. Next month he'll be sitting with Elon and a board of diverse leaders designing an AI system to detect racial bias in sentencing patterns. And next year, he doesn't know, but he knows this. Whatever room he enters, he won't be invisible. He'll be unstoppable. The Senate chamber is colder than expected, not in temperature, but in energy. The walls gleam with marble authority, thick with decades of tradition, some noble, some stained. Marcus sits alone at the witness table, his palms flat on the polished surface, a microphone before him blinking red. A small placard reads, "Mr. Marcus J. Fields, Legal Advisor, Neural Equity Initiative." Above him, senators whisper among themselves, some curious, some skeptical. C-SPAN cameras roll silently. The chairman, an older white man with eyes sharp from decades of hearing half-truths, taps his gavel once. This hearing will now come to order. Today, we address systemic bias in judicial behavior and technological reform in courtroom procedures. "Mr. Fields," he says, peering over his glasses, "you may begin." Marcus nods once, then breathes in deeply. He doesn't read a statement. Instead, he raises his eyes and begins speaking like the courtroom was his birthplace, and every word he'd ever swallowed was now sharpening into form. "Senators," he says, "a month ago I was publicly humiliated by a judge who assumed I didn't belong. Not because I broke protocol, not because I said the wrong thing, but because I was quiet, well-dressed, and black murmurs ripple. And that moment, captured by cameras witnessed by millions, wasn't rare. It was typical. That's what makes it dangerous. His voice never shakes. Today, I stand here not as a victim. I stand here because I survived the silence, and now I'm breaking it." The room stills. Some senators sit back arms crossed. Others lean forward curious. Our initiative has tracked over 400 courtroom incidents in the past year alone, where language used by judges showed measurable racial or class bias, microaggressions, dismissals, disproportionate reprimands. We're pairing this data with a new AI system that uses natural language processing to identify biased judicial behavior in real time. Not to punish, but to retrain, re-educate, and reform. One senator clears his throat. "Mr. Fields, with all due respect, don't you worry this kind of system places too much power in the hands of machines." Marcus meets the man's gaze. "No machine ever called me a fraud because of my skin." He replies evenly, "But they can help prove when humans do." The gallery shifts alive with the power of truth. Said plainly, Marcus doesn't flinch. He continues, "The future of justice doesn't belong to those who protect the old ways. It belongs to those who question them. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe comfort was the problem." The gavel comes down again. The chairman exhales slowly. "Mr. Fields," he says after a moment, "thank you for your testimony. I believe we've just witnessed something historic." That evening, as the sun sinks behind the Capitol dome, Marcus stands alone at the reflecting pool. The city glows around him. His phone buzzes. A video is trending him standing before the Senate labeled, "The Day Justice Spoke Back." But Marcus ignores the headlines. He's already dialing. The phone rings 3 times before a soft, familiar voice answers. "Hey, baby," his mother says, voice still rich with the Georgia warmth. "I saw you on TV today. You didn't tell me you were going to the Capitol." "Didn't want you to worry," he replies, his voice suddenly softer than it's been in days. "Well," she says, half laughing, half sniffling, too late for that. "You stood tall, baby. You look like your daddy when he used to preach." Marcus smiles, the memory pressing into his chest. "You think he'd be proud." "He is proud," she says gently, "and so am I. You're not just practicing law. You're healing it." A tear slips down Marcus's cheek as the wind picks up. Across the water, the lights shimmer like stars learning how to swim. "Come home soon," she adds. "We miss you, I will," he whispers. "But first, I've got work to finish because this wasn't the end. This was only chapter 3 of something bigger, deeper, and unstoppable." Justice had been bruised for too long, but now it had a new voice, and that voice was Marcus J. Fields. The plane touches down in Atlanta just after sunset, the skyline glowing with amber haze as if the city itself had been waiting, holding its breath for his return. Marcus steps off the jetway in a navy trench coat and carries no entourage, no press, just a single worn leather satchel with the initials MJF burned into the corner. The same bag his mother gave him when he left for undergrad over a decade ago. He walks quietly through the terminal where a few passengers recognize him and nudge one another, eyes widening in disbelief. He's been on TV and headlines trending under hashtags like Fields, of Justice, and Asa, Voice of Change. But here at home, the air smells different, humid sweet with pine and thick with memory. A black SUV waits near the curb engine, humming. Marcus doesn't get in right away. He stands outside and takes it in the parking lot lines, faded the same old Welcome to Hartsfield Jackson sign, the smell of fried catfish from a nearby food stand. This is home, not just where he's from, but what made him. The driver rolls down the window and says, "You okay, Mr. Fields?" Marcus nods. "Yeah, just needed a second to remember where it all began." They drive through the city, slowly past the church where his father once preached fire into wooden pews, past the gas station where Marcus stocked shelves at 15 past the corner, where he was once stopped for looking suspicious while walking home in a hoodie. Now, billboards on that same street display his face with the words, "Justice belongs to all. Marcus J. Fields." His stomach turns not with pride, but with gravity. This isn't fame, it's responsibility. The car turns down a quiet street lined with low brick houses and faded porch swings. At the end sits a small one-story home with a creaky screen door and chipping white paint. His childhood home. His mother is already on the porch wearing a floral dress and an apron smudged with flour. She looks exactly the same and completely different. Wiser, smaller, but glowing. Marcus steps out, and before he can speak, she wraps him in the kind of hug that breaks time. "There's my baby," she whispers into his shoulder. "You didn't change at all." He holds her tighter. "I changed everything, Ma, but I never stopped being yours." Inside the house smells like cinnamon and love. The same pictures still hang on the walls. Marcus in a tiny graduation cap. His father holding a Bible and smiling wide. A newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local boy earns full ride to Columbia." They sit down to eat collard greens, cornbread, fried okra, and sweet tea, and talk like no time has passed. But then she leans in, eyes narrowing the way only a mother's can. "What's weighing on you?" Marcus hesitates, then sighs. "I gave everything to that courtroom, to that Senate hearing. People are saying I'm the future of legal reform. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough, if it's real, or if they're just listening, because Elon showed up and shamed the room." She smiles softly. "Baby, you weren't heard because of who stood behind you. You were heard because of how you stood. Don't let the spotlight confuse the light inside you." He exhales the words, sinking deep. "And Marcus," she adds, voice lowering, "your father would have been proud. He used to say justice isn't loud, it's just steady. And you, son, are steady like stone." That night, Marcus lies awake in his childhood room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow above. He thinks of every case he wants to fight, every judge he wants to retrain, every child who needs to see themselves in his story. He remembers that boy outside the courthouse. He remembers the sting of Judge Mathis's voice. He remembers silence and how it felt to finally break it. Morning comes with birdsong and sun through cracked blinds. Marcus rises early, dresses simply, and walks alone to his old middle school down the block. The school hasn't changed. Chipped paint, rusted gates, but when he enters the front office, the staff stares in shock. Mr. Fields, the receptionist, whispers, "Are you here for a speaking event?" "No." Marcus says, "I'm here to listen." That day, he sits with kids in classrooms, eats lunch in the noisy cafeteria, and laughs like the world isn't on his shoulders. But then, in the auditorium, he takes the mic one more time and tells them, "You don't need a fancy suit to be heard. You don't need permission to be powerful. You just need to remember your story matters, even when no one's listening yet." A small girl in the front row, no older than 8, raises her hand. "Do you think someone like me can be a lawyer too?" Marcus crouches to her level and looks her in the eye. I don't think he says I know. That night, as he boards his flight back to D.C., Marcus looks down at the city below. Atlanta glowing like a constellation stitched to the earth, and whispers, "We're just getting started. Justice had spoken. But now it would march, teach, rise, and multiply." 2 years later, the heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 17 swing open once again, but this time the air shifts, not with tension, but with reverence. The murmurs hush, the reporters freeze, the lawyers adjust their ties, because this isn't just another trial. This is history. Walking in 6'2", steady, unshaken, dressed in black robes that carry not just authority but legacy. The bailiff rises and calls out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus J. Fields," and they rise, every one of them, including Greg Mathis, now retired, sitting quietly in the gallery with his hands, clasped eyes, lowered, no longer the face behind the bench, but a witness to the world he once judged too quickly. Marcus steps to the seat, his seat, and sits with the grace of a man who's seen injustice from both ends of the gavel. The seal behind him gleams with gold light. His eyes scan the room not to assess, not to intimidate but to understand, to see what others missed. A young public defender stands before him nervous, clutching a stack of notes. Opposite her is a polished prosecutor, loud and confident. The defendant is a 17-year-old black boy with wide, terrified eyes and a trembling knee, accused of theft, caught on a grainy security camera, taking something that wasn't his, a bag of food and formula. The prosecutor is already speaking. Your Honor, the state recommends maximum sentencing. This is his second offense, but Marcus raises his hand gently but firmly. Counselor. He says, his voice smooth but commanding. This courtroom is not a machine. We don't manufacture guilt here. We weigh humanity. Please speak with that in mind. The prosecutor stammers, Yes, Your Honor. Then Marcus turns to the young defendant. Son, he says, voice softer. Now, you're not invisible here. I see you, and I want you to understand this isn't the end of your story. The boy's lips quiver. A tear slips down. The gallery is silent. You see Marcus continues, his eyes flicking to the press in the back. I stood where you stood once. Not on trial, but under judgment. Not just for my actions, but for my appearance. For daring to be silent and black in the wrong room. But I learned silence can be power if you fill it with truth. So today, I won't sentence you to years in prison. I sentence you to mentorship, education, and accountability. And if you take this second chance seriously, I will personally check in with your program coordinator every month. Gasps echo. The prosecutor begins to object, but Marcus silences him with a glance. Justice is not vengeance. He says it's vision. It's what we do with the broken pieces that matters. Outside, cameras swarm. The headline writes itself, from shamed clerk to revolutionary Judge Marcus Fields. Reshapes justice, but inside, Marcus stays still calm, unaffected. Because this is what he came to build. Not attention, not legacy, but correction, restoration. And as the court adjourns and people filter out, Mathis approaches slowly. You honored the bench better than I ever did, he says, eyes damp. Marcus places a hand on the man's shoulder. We are not perfect, he replies, but we can choose to make justice less about punishment and more about possibility. That night, back in chambers, Marcus opens a worn notebook. His father's old Bible tucked into the side, and begins drafting a proposal. The Fields Fellowship, a program placing formerly incarcerated youth into paid legal internships across the country, because the fight wasn't over. Not until courtrooms stopped seeing color as threat. Not until power stopped being a mirror for fear. Not until justice became not just blind, but kind and brave and awake. And Marcus Judge. Marcus J. Fields wasn't finished yet. He was only just beginning to swing the gavel, not as a symbol of power, but as a promise kept. 35 years later, the courtroom is packed once more, but this time with no defendants, no prosecutors, no fear or fire, only gratitude. The air is heavy with emotion, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, but sinks deep into the marrow of those present. People have flown in from across the country. The marble halls of the Georgia Supreme Court are filled with old students, young lawyers, former convicts, now professors' mothers with sons who once stood trembling in front of a judge and were instead handed hope. At the center of it all sits a silver-haired man, his frame tall but slightly bowed with age. His robe folded neatly beside him on a velvet bench. Judge Marcus J. Fields, retiring. He wears no medals. He's refused all plaques. His only request a seat by the window and an open mic for anyone to speak. and speak they do. A woman in her 40s steps forward, first, her voice trembling. I was 16. I stole formula. I thought I was done. But you didn't see a criminal. You saw a child. You gave me a second chance. And now she pauses, voice cracking. Now I run a nonprofit that feeds thousands of kids like I once was. A pause, then a standing ovation. She walks to Marcus and hugs him tightly. He smiles, eyes shimmering. You were never broken. He whispers, just waiting to be seen. Then a young man, dreadlocks, tied-back suit. Crisp, takes the stage I clerked under Judge Fields in D.C. I remember he told me, never raise your voice if you can raise your impact. I carry that into every courtroom I enter. Now, another voice follows. Then another, a veteran congresswoman, a federal judge. A young boy whose mother was saved by the Fields Fellowship now preparing for law school. Even Greg Mathis, old and gray, appears in the front row, nodding slowly, a quiet smile on his face. Finally, the governor steps up Judge Fields. He says, you didn't just uphold the law. You redefined it, you humanized it, and you forced it to grow up. The crowd rises as one, but Marcus waves them down gently. He takes slow steps to the podium, leaning slightly on a cane, carved with the words dignity, equity, truth. He begins softly. They once said justice was blind. But I've learned true justice sees everything. It sees struggle. It sees silence. It sees the wounds under the suits and the brilliance under the pain. He looks out over the room full of lawyers, former prisoners, CEOs, janitors, professors, and a dozen children named Marcus. I didn't come here to be remembered. He says, voice gravelly now, but still commanding. I came here to open a door. If I've done that even once, then my work is complete. He steps back. The applause is thunderous. Some cry. Others simply hold their hearts in silence. That night he returns to the same small house in Atlanta, now renovated, but still wrapped in the same porch his mother once stood on apron, dusted with flour. She's long gone, but her spirit breathes in every corner. Marcus sits in her old rocking chair, a warm blanket over his knees. The stars are out. He looks up at them with a smile. From his coat, he pulls a letter addressed to the National Bar Association. It's a final act endowing a permanent fund for underrepresented youth entering law named the Invisible Now Seen Project. He closes his eyes, breathes deeply. The crickets sing. The streetlights hum. And somewhere in the city, a boy walks into a courtroom for the first time. Not as a defendant, but as an intern. He's handed a badge. A robe waits for him in the future. And the gavel once used to silence people like him now waits to be wielded by someone born from everything Marcus stood for. And so the legacy does not end. It echoes quiet, steady, like the beating heart of justice finally wide awake. 10 years have passed since Judge Marcus J. Fields laid down his gavel for the final time. But his presence has only grown louder with every generation that followed. A statue now stands at the entrance of the National Justice and Reform Center in Washington, D.C. Not one of a man in a robe looking stern, but of Marcus seated on a bench beside a child, both of them smiling, both holding a law book open together. The plaque beneath reads, "Justice is not what you wear. It's what you extend." M. J. Fields. It is a brisk fall morning, and inside that very center, a packed auditorium buzzes with the energy of a new generation. Today is the first international summit of the Fields Fellowship Legacy Network, attended by legal scholars, social reformers, and youth leaders from over 30 countries. On stage stands a poised young black woman no older than 25, her curly hair tied back in a confident bun, wearing a silver pin shaped like a gavel crossed with a pen. Her name is Aaliyah Monroe, Harvard Law graduate Rhodes Scholar, and the first recipient of the Marcus J. Fields Global Justice Medal. Her voice rings across the room, as if it carries echoes from another life. Before I ever knew what a courtroom was, she says I knew his name. My father used to say, "If Judge Fields could be calm when the world disrespected him, you can be fierce when the world doubts you." The crowd laughs gently. But when I was 12, I found an old video grainy footage of a quiet man being shamed by a judge, and then defended by Elon Musk, and then he spoke. I watched that clip until it burned into my mind. Not because he spoke loudly, but because he never broke. That was the moment I decided to become a lawyer, not to punish, but to protect. Her voice trembles slightly. Today, I wear this pin not to honor the man he was, but the movement he lit in all of us. Judge Fields didn't just change courtrooms. He made justice feel like home. The audience rises in unison, thousands applauding. And from the front row an elderly man stooped but smiling wipes his eyes. It's Elijah Fields, Marcus's only son, now a retired teacher. He brought with him today an old leather-bound book, the same one his father carried for years. During the final segment of the summit, Elijah takes the stage slowly. The room silences once more. My father taught me 3 things he says. First, never raise your voice if you can raise a life. Second, truth doesn't need to shout, it needs to stand. And third, he opens the old book to a dog-eared page where Marcus once wrote in fading ink, "Justice that forgets the human heart becomes just another weapon." Elijah closes the book and looks out across the sea of faces. He's not buried in a courthouse. He lives in every hand that reaches down instead of pointing, in every voice that says, "I see you," to someone the world tries to erase. His voice breaks, and the room leans in as if catching a final whisper. We are not here because of the man. We are here because of the mirror he held up to justice, and dared it to see everyone. Afterward, as the crowd empties and the cameras shut down, a small girl approaches Elijah quietly, her backpack filled with books and a binder labeled Future Justice League. She shyly hands him a folded note. "Can you give this to Judge Fields?" she asks. Elijah kneels and says gently, "He's watching in ways you can't see, but I promise he'll feel this." When she walks away, he unfolds the paper. It reads, "Dear Judge Fields, I want to be like you. Not because you were famous, but because you made people feel safe. Love. Destiny. Age 9. Elijah stares at the handwriting, lets out a soft laugh, and places the note inside his father's book. Outside, the bronze statue catches the last light of the day. The shadows stretch long, like memory, like legacy. And somewhere in a quiet courtroom in a small city, a new judge, young, brown-skinned, wearing no robe. But a smile leans forward toward a trembling defendant and says gently, "I see you. Let's build something from here." And so it ends not with silence, but with a rising chorus echoing through every courtroom, every classroom, every heart that ever felt unseen. Judge Marcus J. Fields may have laid down his gavel, but what he built lives on in every outstretched hand, every second chance offered, and every young voice now speaking with power and purpose. His life was more than headlines, more than viral clips, more than the stone statue that bears his name. It was a blueprint, a reminder that justice, when guided by humility and courage, can rise above prejudice, silence the doubters, and ignite generations. From the boy wrongly judged in a courtroom to the man who redefined justice for millions. Marcus's story is not just one to remember, it's one to continue. And now that torch has passed. To you, if this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, in dignity over judgment, and in the power of standing tall when the world looks down, then join us. Subscribe to our channel to witness more powerful emotional stories like this, true tales of justice, redemption, and human strength that the world needs to hear. Comment your thoughts, share your voice, and be part of a community that believes stories can change the world. Share this video with someone who needs hope, needs courage, or just needs to remember that they matter. Hit the bell icon so you never miss the next story that could change everything, because justice begins with being seen. And here you are, seen.